Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Unfortunately, last week we didn't have an episode because, honestly, the mental health issues going around the Jewish community, including myself, kind of just felt like I needed a little bit of a break. This week is going to possibly be a little bit jumbled as I'm going over about 2 weeks worth of things that have been coming up and things that people of the diaspora and Israel have been dealing with. So I apologize if this comes off a little bit discombobulated. We have seen a major shift in the appeal and messaging coming out from the world in regards to Israel. At first, we saw the Israelis had a lot of sympathy as people were seeing what had happened over the October 7th weekend. Unfortunately, depending on who we ask, some people quicker than others, the messaging has changed dramatically from empathy and sympathy for the Jews and for the Israelis to now complete and utter condemnation of Israel defending themselves. I can't say that this is a surprise. Most of us had posted things way back saying, remember this anger you're feeling when Israel defends itself, because we knew this was coming. I'm really not sure that we expected, and I know many people have commented to me, that the amount of people that we see coming out against Israel is honestly outrageous. We're used to seeing the typical protesters out in front of Capitol buildings and embassies and parliament buildings around the world, but I don't think any of us thought we'd see hundreds of thousands of people around the world coming out to demonize Israel under the guise of being pro-Palestinian. One thing that really stuck out to me when we see these big crowds is actually that this is not a new thing. Post-pandemic, many people who have followed Canadian politics and to some extent American politics, has heard about the convoy. So this was, in Canada, a group of truckers who were anti-mask, anti-vax, wanting to bring down prices of gasoline and border restrictions, a whole bunch of different anti-government, valid or invalid, depending on who you speak to. And these people actually had a convoy where they started from one end of the country and parked their trucks in front of the Canadian capital, essentially a complete shutdown of the city. They were honking their horns to the point of actually being sued by residents for ear damage and for post-traumatic stress syndrome from the constant blaring of horns all hours of the night. But what was interesting is in the aftermath, once that situation had been dealt with in whatever way it was dealt with, there was a revelation of the fact that the people behind that trucker convoy appeared to be not exactly what people had thought. Many of the people who started the convoy or had the most influence on the initial convoy were very anti-government, very white supremacist at times. You know, obviously this is a broad brush and we can't paint everybody with that. But the actual organizers seemed to not be as wholesome and truthful as we all thought. Let's just say that maybe the messaging that we had heard coming out of that trucker convoy was not necessarily the initial purpose or even what the original people had intended. It'd sort of been watered down over time in order to get more support from the community at large. This is the idea behind what I'm seeing today around the world. We see the typical pro-Palestinian, and I would consider anti-Israel people, who have somehow used this same tactic in order to get crowds of hundreds of thousands of people to get on their side. What they are able to do is kind of hide the real message behind this sort of watered down idea. And they get all of these well-meaning people to be like, yeah, I mean, I guess I support not bombing babies all day long and killing women and children all day. Sure, I can get on that. I'll join it and, carry some free Palestine swag. But what they don't realize is that the people who are actually running it, the people behind it, that's not their message. You'll see it mostly in some of these videos, some of the signs that say from the river to the sea, which is a nice little hidden way for the non-experienced people who are protesting to not realize what they actually mean. And there's been some funny memes about this online suggesting like, what does that mean from the river to the sea? And these people who support it have absolutely no idea what that even means or where that river is or which river it is. It's actually quite funny how uneducated people who are protesting are. But that's exactly what these people are relying on. They're saying things in Arabic that they know that anyone who's not Arabic speaking, which is most of the people who are going out, they'll have no idea that they're calling for the death of Jews. But they're walking and they're holding signs, so they support it. If even one of these people would ask any of these pro-Palestinian supposedly supporters, ask them, what does it mean from the river to the sea? Like right now, in between that river and sea are millions of Jewish people. Are they supposed to just go away? Or are you going to kill them, like on October 7th? Or are they going to be part of some future Palestinian state and be treated like equals? Or will their holy sites be desecrated? And would they be murdered and subjugated like they were when they were under the Ottoman Empire? I would love to hear an answer from some pro-Palestinian what from the river to the sea means, if not just the murder of Jewish people who live between that river and that sea. There's also the chant to remember these old catastrophes that the Muslim people were murdering Jews of Israel. And they're saying, remember it, let's do it again. But of course, if you're not educated, you have no idea. And there are so many people who are getting tied up and marching, believing it's for the best thing to the Palestinian people. But in reality, they have no idea what they're talking about, because if they did support the actual Palestinian people, they would actually learn something from podcasts like this and from their friends who are Jewish and all over the media. Look around. People have actually started the message that Hamas is the problem, and Hamas is doing this against the Palestinian best interest. Even for the first time, I've seen people like Bernie Sanders, who's always been anti-Israel, come out and say he does not support a ceasefire because Hamas needs to be taken out. We see Mahmoud Abbas, who, in all fairness, is the leader of the Palestinian Authority, the opposition to Hamas. He said that they're using ambulances to sneak fighters into Egypt. He's admitting it openly. Many of their people admit it. It's shocking that the propaganda is so strong that people who are at these events still have no idea what they're protesting for, but they still show up because they think they're doing the right thing. And it is actually frightening how easy it is to manipulate people. And this is why it reminds me of that trucker convoy in Canada, because so many people got behind this message and had no idea what it really meant. They thought it was for lower inflation and gas prices and, maybe people should have the choice to do this or that with their body. Like, they think it was just this watered down message, but the people behind it maybe didn't have that same message and they were just hiding it from people. And that's what's scary to me. Like, what's the next version of this? The next war that Israel has to be going into because they're terrorized by Hezbollah or by Iran. Like, we have no support anymore because apparently everyone just believes that Israel is bad without any research. In addition to the people changing their views, where they once, had sympathy for the Jewish people and the Israeli people, things have changed dramatically and the propaganda is strong. The amount of stuff coming out of, we call it Pollywood because the Palestinian media is so heavily influenced. The numbers that amazingly just keep going up and up. And honestly, I wonder, as a little bit of a joke, if the Hamas health ministry just hits a button and it just comes up with a random number of how many people were killed today. There's no evidence of if these people were terrorists or not, if they were being held there against their will by Hamas or not. We have seen multiple examples of Hamas killing their own people trying to flee. I said on Instagram recently that Israel is doing more for the Palestinian people right now than Hamas ever did, because they're trying to open the corridor that Hamas closed to keep human shields there. And people's views are just skewed so much by this hate that's being put online. In addition to the people, it's the governments. We see the slow-moving United States where they say Israel has a right to defend itself. We don't want a ceasefire, but... And we see Canada, we don't want a ceasefire, but... And then they sort of say, but let's do a humanitarian pause. Let's talk about what a humanitarian pause would be. We've already seen that Hamas is using ambulances essentially as taxi cabs. They put their terrorists in these things pretending to be victims, allowing them to drive them to the hospital, which their command center is under, regroup, get some more rockets, move around to a different location. They could be even moving hostages for all we know. And people are asking for a humanitarian pause, which would only allow them to do that more freely. That is not to say that people who are injured shouldn't be allowed to be moved to whatever hospital they need to go to. But the problem is we're fighting a group of terrorists who don't care about Western values. They don't care about keeping ambulances free of terrorism. They will use that against Israel and against the West and anybody who believes that that should be a right. And they make Israel look bad when they hit an ambulance, despite the fact that it had terrorists in it. And it's outrageous that the world sits here and takes this, and the governments of the United States and Canada are saying, oh, let's pause, let's let them regroup, it's all about humanitarian aid. The Israelis gave them 3 weeks to get out. If they chose not to leave, or were being forced not to leave, please explain to me how a humanitarian pause is going to change that. It's not going to change that. They're still going to be stuck there because Hamas is keeping them there. It makes no sense to me to make a humanitarian pause to continue the people staying where they're staying. Maybe you get some Band-Aids and some food into them, but then Israel goes in and starts bombing again to try and get Hamas out. So the only people that have actually won from this would be Hamas, being able to move their people around, regroup, get some rockets back, whatever it might be that they need to do. So a humanitarian pause, in theory, would be great if it was actually used as a humanitarian pause, but it will not be. We always try and pretend like Hamas is a rational actor and they will fulfill all the requirements under international law and the Geneva Convention. We know they don't. Period. End of story. There's no doubt. I don't even think anybody would suggest that Hamas, who did what they did on October 7th and have kidnapped and are refusing to return civilians, is following any type of law. There's no way anyone's going to claim that. So why do we expect them to now claim that they're going to do it and that they're going to abide by international law? On that same note, seeing President Joe Biden, seeing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pledging millions and millions of dollars to Gaza, to make it seem both sides here, we got to support both sides so we don't look bad to our, our country and our constituents. Don't get me wrong. The Palestinian people will need to rebuild for sure. No question. And I say that aid should go in once Hamas is gone. But what I'll say is, why are we giving money to Hamas to go and rebuild? They're going to be rebuilding their terror tunnels. They're going to be rebuilding their bombs and their rockets, and they're going to line their pockets like the Qatari 5-star general over there who's living in a 5-star hotel with $4 billion in the bank while crying poor. The poor Palestinians can't afford electricity or water or food. That man can literally go and buy it all by himself. So where do you think that money comes from? You think he's got like a side business and a nice tech company? No, he and his friends are stealing the international aid, and for like these countries to give them aid, knowing that that's where it goes, it's just ridiculous. It's insane that we're still doing this. These governments just honestly are all about the politics, for the most part anyway, and that they don't really care about either side. Really. They don't have any principles. They're just trying to get as many votes as they can and try and play the middle ground where in one speech they'll go and speak to the Jews and say we support Israel and we're going to give them everything they need. And on the other hand, they'll go and speak to a Palestinian group and say, we support you. Israel needs to have a ceasefire. You're poor Palestinians. We need to get you a state without any kind of conditions of releasing the hostages. Both sides that's going on here is actually quite frightening. And we've seen it so much recently that every time we see the government or any kind of news reports mentioning the attacks on Jewish people, we always see the Islamophobia connected to it. They cannot at any point say that anti-Semitism by itself is wrong. There's some sort of weird thing going on in their brains that they have to also say Islamophobia is wrong just to make sure that we don't seem like we're supporting one side over the other. And that way, frankly, neither side gets any kind of support. I can say unequivocally that Islamophobia is wrong, period, by anybody who does it. Palestinians are being abused by other Muslims all over the Middle East that no one's talking about. In Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan. I can call that out. But I don't need to also say, oh, but by the way, anti-Semitism is a thing too. They are two completely different things, but for some reason we feel the need to put them together because we have to make sure that nobody thinks we're one side or the other. This needs to stop. Almost like you can't have one without the other. There's no such thing as anti-Semitism if there isn't also a thing called Islamophobia, and vice versa. Although to be fair, actually, I would say that Islamophobia seems to be allowed on its own. Anti-Semitism is not. I hear very often there's in the United States House, there's in the Canadian Senate, all kinds of things that are happening about Islamophobia and how they're going to fight it and how there's big problems going on and they have to do research on what's going wrong. Yet, for some reason, apparently right now, with the incredible rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing, we don't see the same amount of effort being put in to anti-Jewish hate. And I just don't understand it. I want to end this podcast on a little bit of a happier note. And it's actually very amazing to see the amount of people who are now happily and proudly wearing their Jewish stars. Honestly, I actually never wore one in the past. I just personally didn't really like wearing jewelry other than my wedding ring. But I've started wearing a Magen David and wearing it openly and proudly. And when I walk around places like the gym and other places and I see others pulling out their Stars of David and wearing it around their neck, it gives me such a sense of pride and such a sense of community when you feel nothing but alone in this world. And when you walk by that person who's also wearing one and you know that they're wearing it to show off their pride, that you two are together in this fight. And there's something so incredible about that. I've been so touched watching other people walk around with their Jewish stars just like me. And we can kind of have this acknowledgement, sometimes verbally and sometimes just kind of in a look, that we are on the same side and we are fighting this together. I've also seen an outpouring of people coming up to me and talking about my merchandise that I have. My wife and I, if you haven't seen it on our Instagram account, we have some merchandise that we've created for the Judean movement, along with the IDF logos. So there are many IDF logos that we've put on t-shirts. We are giving the profits to the IDF through various charities. And to see people wearing that or coming up to us and saying, "Where did you get that? I love it. I want to wear one too." It was so touching that people so proudly want to show off that they're Jewish in a time where it has never been more dangerous to be an openly Jewish person other than during the Holocaust. We see people pulling down their mezuzahs out of fear. And instead, I'm pulling out and putting on a Magen David around my neck. And I'm saying, I am proud and you are not going to make me hide. And I think that all of us should take that as a message. However you choose to show off your Judaism, whether it's through a mezuzah on your door, a necklace, a shirt, or just knowing that you're Jewish and being proud to tell people, you should do that knowing that there are so many of us with you by your side, and we are there to be strong together. We are not going anywhere. We will stand up. Our IDF is strong, and every one of us has that little piece of the IDF in us. We have generations of struggle, and we have always had hope. Like our anthem for our country, Hatikva, we have hope, and we are never going to be put into those ovens ever again. No matter if it's in Europe, or if it's in Canada, or the United States, be proud, be strong, Am Yisrael Chai. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.